Derek used a word earlier that maybe you've heard used as a verb. So the word other, right, usually is a noun, or maybe it's an adjective. It's not maybe technically a verb, but when it's used as a verb, right, that's something that human beings are very, very good at othering people who are different than us, right? What does that mean, right? It means treating people who are not like us as somehow less valuable, or sometimes as experiencing life differently, that maybe they don't have the same needs that we do, or the same experiences that we do. And I can share the study with you if you'd like, but there have been studies made that show that different ethnicities, and this is just data-driven, are administered pain medications at different rates and doses. What does that mean? I don't know. Maybe there's some othering going on in that we think that certain people experience pain perhaps in different ways. Now, I think it's important for us, right, to recognize that this is something that happens, and we don't necessarily do it on purpose, but we have stereotypes. I mean, that's what it all kind of, I don't know if it all comes down to that, but that's certainly part of it. We have stereotypes of different kinds of people. When it comes to different races, we have stereotypes. I'm gonna share with you some offensive stereotypes. Not super. I left the most offensive ones out, but right. But there are stereotypes that we have, right? Historically, for instance, Black people are considered lazy or prone to violence. Asian people are assumed to be good at math, and and in a way they're considered the perpetual foreigner. Where are you from? Well, I'm from Chicago. Oh, right. Oh, I thought you were from wherever in Asia, right? Hispanics, Latinos are considered or assumed or stereotyped as being poor and uneducated. White people are stereotyped as as not being able to dance, as not being able to handle spicy food, but more seriously, right, as thinking that they're smarter than everybody else and that they can fix everybody's problems, right? I was talking to somebody just yesterday who had spent a year in Thailand, and he was like, it's so interesting to experience the world from another part of the world, where the way they see Americans, and they kind of see Americans as thinking that, oh yeah, we can fix everything, right? We know how to fix all of your problems. If you just do what we tell you to do, then your life will be good, right? We have these stereotypes. Now, these things that I mentioned are true of some people, in every category of people, but certainly not of every person in a particular category of people. We have all kinds of other categories as well, right? People that we tend to other, that we think experience the world in different ways and that maybe we don't identify with them. The physically disabled, right? Sometimes we don't know how to act around someone who's physically disabled, mentally disabled, the elderly, especially maybe if they're struggling with health issues or dementia. We don't know how to act. My mom has talked about feeling like she experiences ageism, where she's kind of overlooked in life more than she used to be. The young can be othered, right? Especially if they dress funny or listen to weird music, right? Those millennials, those Gen Zers, they're so lazy. They don't know how to get up in the morning and go to a job, right? We other the poor. We have stereotypes about the poor. We have stereotypes about the rich. And we can other those who we think of as wealthy. We other religions and spiritualities, Catholic, Protestant, Muslim, Jewish, atheist, whatever, right? We do this to each other. We other one another. And again, we make assumptions about how these other different kinds of people experience reality, experience the world. We see maybe another kind of person and we think, oh, well, they're used to living in that kind of a neighborhood, or they're used to living on that kind of an income, or they're accustomed to whatever their experience of life is, suffering in that way. Well, they grew up with that. And so, but if we were to face the kind of difficulties, challenges, and I say we meaning, well, whoever you are, that would be hard. It would be hard. And it's not less hard for someone who is not like us, right? So What do we do about this othering? We're going to look at a story today in Genesis in which two members of Abraham's family are othered. Now, let me set a little bit of context. This comes right after the birth of Isaac, which we talked about last week. So, just a quick review. God had promised Abraham 25 years earlier that he would make Abraham into a great nation and that all peoples on earth would be blessed through him. However, they didn't have children, and so the implied promise was also, you're going to have a baby. And they were so happy, and they thought it would happen right away, but it didn't. And they kept waiting and waiting and waiting, and 25 years later, finally, they have a baby. And they're so happy. And so we talked about that last week. Last week, right, we read about the birth of Isaac, and it starts with these words. It says, "Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, and he, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised." Right? And this focus on Sarah, probably because she was the one who had lived with the stigma and the shame of her barrenness, right, for so long. And finally now, God had freed her from that condition, so to speak, from the condition, the shame, the stigma. And then she says a little bit later, right, there's so much joy. It says, Sarah said, "God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me." And of course, that's a play on the name Isaac, which means laughter, or he laughs. And prior to this, it had referred to Abraham's and Sarah's sort of cynical laughter, when God kept saying that you're going to have a baby. You're going to, yeah, right. Okay, then name him Isaac. He laughs. But now there's this joyful laughter, right? So this joyful celebration of the birth of Isaac, right? And it's like everything finally is now the way it was meant to be. This is what God had promised. This is what Abraham and Sarah had been hoping for. However, human beings are sinful and selfish and insecure, and so things got ugly fast. So let me read to you the passage that we're going to look at today, and it has to do with Hagar and Ishmael. And we talked about Hagar and Ishmael earlier this spring and maybe a few weeks ago again. They've been in the story here and there. I'll review who they are, but let me just read to you the passage for today. "The child," that is Isaac, "grew and was weaned. And on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking. And she said to Abraham, 'Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac.' The matter distressed Abraham greatly, because it concerned his son. But God said to him, 'Do not be so distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the slave into a nation also, because he is your offspring.' Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down about a bow shot away, for she thought, 'I cannot watch the boy die.' And as she sat there, she began to sob. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, 'What is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation.' Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt." So kind of a happy ending to that story, but a really hard story. Right? Let me do a quick review of who Hagar and Ishmael are. Again, right? The overarching story is that God had made this promise to Abraham and to Sarah that you will have a child, and it wasn't happening, and all kinds of things are happening in the story of Abraham and Sarah. And at one point, Sarah says, you know what? God's not coming through for us. Why don't we just do this? You sleep with my slave Hagar, and then her child can be our child, and maybe that's the way that God is going to fulfill the promise, right? And so Abraham says, okay. Now, was that good? Was that okay? No. Was it standard in the ancient world, in that society? It was. Was it kind of abusive? Yeah. But what it did was it actually, in a way, gave Hagar a little bit of status, right? Because now she had a son. She had something that she was contributing to the well-being of the family, right? And for Sarah, that stirred up all kinds of envy and anger, and she began to mistreat Hagar, is what the scripture says. And so Hagar ran away with her baby, and she goes off into the wilderness, almost a little bit like this here, but she runs away out into the wilderness, and she's like, I don't know what to do. How can I survive out here? And then God comes to her, right? And he says to Hagar, Hagar, where have you come from and where are you going? Which is not just about geography, but it's about who are you and what are you hoping for? And I'm listening to you, and I'm here for you. And he makes a promise to Hagar about Ishmael, again, that I will make him into a great nation. He will be strong. And then Hagar becomes the first person in the Bible to give God a new name. She says, you are El Roi, which means the God who sees me. You are the God who sees me, even when nobody else seems to see me. I know now that you see me. And she names her baby Ishmael, which means God hears, right? This is the God who sees me and who hears me. God says to Hagar, go back to Abraham and Sarah. I'll take care of you. So she goes back to Abraham and Sarah. And Abraham essentially raises Ishmael as his firstborn son, and he loves Ishmael, right? We don't see any sense of Abraham like thinking any less of Ishmael. In fact, at one point, Abraham is having a conversation with God, and he says to God, if only the promise could come through Ishmael. And God says, no, not through Ishmael. It's going to come through the son that Sarah will bear. But Ishmael is included in the covenant, right? I'm not rejecting Ishmael, right? So now we come to the birth of Isaac, and Ishmael, it sounds like in this story, is maybe 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, something like that, right? And Isaac is born, and there's all this joy. And when Isaac is weaned, Abraham throws a huge party, right? Big celebration. And there's laughter, right? And then there's Ishmael, and we're told that Ishmael was mocking, right? Verse 9, but Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar, the Egyptian, had borne to Abraham was mocking. Now, just a little side note, it's kind of there's a play on words going on here. It's the word, here, go on to the next slide. In Hebrew, the word for mocking is mesahek, which is related to the name Isaac. Isaac, right? Mesahek. So he's laughing too. It's a different kind of laughing. He's mocking the new baby. Okay, we'll unpack that in a few minutes. He mocks the baby, and Sarah is infuriated by this. Now, all kinds of things in her past that are bringing up all this anger, right? All of the shame and the stigma of her barrenness and the laughter that she had probably endured from others over all these years. And now she's celebrating, but now there's more laughter, mocking directed at her. And so she is so angry about this. And she says to Abraham, verse 10, says, and she said to Abraham, get rid of that slave woman and her son. Not get rid of Hagar and Ishmael, that slave woman and her son. For that woman's son will never share in the inheritance of my son Isaac, right? They don't belong here. Get rid of them, right? Sarah, others Hagar and Ishmael. Now, I think it's worth considering or asking the question, who actually is the villain in the story, though, right? Because Ishmael, right? Maybe it's Ishmael. He was the one who was mocking. Was that good? Was that right? No, right? Is it good to make fun of your little baby brother? No, it's not. Although we have a lot of that going on in our family. But anyway, we always have to, it's a constant work in progress. Right? Not okay though, right? But let's also think about where Ishmael is coming from, right? For 10, 11, 12 years now, his entire life, he's been his father's pride and joy, right? He has been his father's son, right? And he knew where he stood in the family. And now, all of a sudden, there is a new baby, a new son, and Ishmael's like, I don't know how I fit in here anymore. And, when you're young and you're immature, what do? Well, maybe you just make fun of the new thing, right? And so he mocks. Ha ha ha, that baby, whatever. He makes fun of the baby. So maybe Ishmael's the villain, but maybe Sarah is the villain, right? She's so uncompassionate and cruel in this story. But you know the saying, hurt people hurt people. And Sarah has experienced a lot of hurt up until this point in her life. And we read some of the stories where even Abraham hurt her. But she has experienced a lot of hurt. And now she feels like this joy, this hope that she has, this goodness is being threatened. And so she lashes out. Is it good that she did that? No. Can we kind of understand where that's coming from? Yeah. So, is Ishmael the villain? Is Sarah the villain? Or maybe is Abraham the villain? It's kind of interesting. Abraham is kind of wishy-washy. And this he comes across that way quite a bit, I was noticing as we've been doing this series. He's not a super strong person in terms of, well, no, here's the right thing we got to do. Let's do that. Sarah says, get rid of him. And here's what we read. It says, verse 11, the matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son, right? So he was like, I don't think I want to do that. I don't think I want to get rid of them. But in the end, he does get rid of them. And it is with sort of God's permission. God says, I will take care of them. But he gets rid of them, not with animosity, but with sort of resignation and maybe with sort of some weakness and some ambivalence. But the result is the same, right? Hagar and Ishmael have been othered, have been rejected, have been cast out. And Abraham doesn't have to see any of their suffering. He can go on living his life and not be aware at all of whatever it is that they're going through. Right? So, who's the villain? I don't know that we can say any of them are the villain, but they're all broken. Right? They're all sinful, selfish, insecure. It's just an ugly, ugly situation, ugly family situation, broken in ways that are almost hard to imagine. So let's talk about what happens then to Hagar and Ishmael. Abraham sends them out, and he gives them some food and some water, and they're out in the wilderness, and of course, eventually they run out. And they run out of water, and they become dehydrated. And, Hagar does her best to take care of Ishmael, but he's becoming weaker. He's just a young boy, and he's becoming so weak she doesn't know what to do. We're told that she lays him under a bush. She goes about 100 yards away. Here's what it says, verse 16. It says, then she went off and sat down about a bow shot away, for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And as she sat there, she began to sob. Now, on the one hand, you could say, that sounds kind of callous, right? Wouldn't she want to hold her boy until the end? And maybe, yeah, but I don't think this is an act of callousness. This is an act of utter despair, right? She has sunk to the lowest possible place that she could ever sink to. I can't even take care of my son, and I don't know what to do. She began to sob. I think it's interesting in some ways how the emotions, the inner feelings are almost more pronounced in the way the story is told in Hagar than in any of the other characters. So she's hit this complete point of despair, and then the story changes, kind of like the last time we had the story of Hagar in the wilderness. And this is what happens. Verse 17. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Right? What happens? God hears. God hears. Remember what Ishmael's name means? God hears. Right? God is living up to the name that Hagar had given Ishmael. God hears Hagar. God hears Ishmael. And he says, "I am with you." Right? And he promises to be with him. And it even says that, right? A little bit later. I don't have this up on the screen. It says, verse 20, God was with the boy as he grew up. It doesn't say that about a lot of people. I think it's true of everyone, but it specifies that God was with him. God did not abandon Ishmael. God did not abandon Hagar. Now, right, there is a conflict in this story. So a little kind of theologically speaking, there's this conflict, this tension between the two sons, right? Now, Isaac's a baby, and so he's not really engaged in conflict, but in the story, there's this tension between the child who was promised and was a sheer gift, Isaac, and then the child who was brought into the world by skillful determination, right? There's the tension between the child who was chosen and the child who was not chosen, but is treasured, loved. There's nothing, Isaac's chosenness has nothing to do with how much God loves him. Right? It has nothing to do with how good Isaac was, or how spiritual Isaac was, or how religious Isaac was, or anything like that. He was just chosen. Now, we do tend to think that when we say someone was chosen, oh, they're the chosen one, it's because they're so special and so good in some way. That's not how the Bible uses the word chosen. You're chosen for a purpose, to do something, to accomplish something. His purpose, he was chosen to be a part of that lineage of Abraham, to build this great nation who would be a blessing to all the peoples of the earth, right? That's his chosenness. But it has nothing to do with his belovedness. He was beloved, just like every other human being, treasured by God. And the fact that Ishmael was not chosen does not in any way negate his belovedness. Both of them are loved. Both of them are treasured. What I love about this story is it reminds us that God treasures those that the world tends not to treasure. God treasures those that the world tends to other, right? For God, there is no human being of which he says, oh, you're different, right? Everyone is a beloved child of God. I think the invitation of this story is for us to become the kind of people who treasure the untreasured of the world, right? Who treasure the othered of the world. Now, how do we begin to do that? I think it starts with the way that it started in this story. God came to Hagar, and what does it say? God heard the boy crying. God heard. God listened. The way we begin to become people who treasure the untreasured of the world, who treasure the othered of the world, is to begin by listening. Now, okay, how do we do that? I'm going to get real practical here at the end, and then we're going to be done. But I want to give you some specific things that you might consider in terms of being a person who listens. All right, so I think listening can mean getting curious instead of making assumptions about people. There's a great scene in Ted Lasso. I'm watching that show now. Anybody ever see that? Don't be judgmental, be curious, right? I love that, right? So maybe this week, Pick one person who really frustrates you. And you don't have to necessarily talk to them, but at least try to think, what's their story, right? What brought them to where they are now, here, right? What was it that shaped them? And that at least puts you in a posture of listening, right? And if appropriate, if it works, go ahead and maybe say, tell me your story. I'd love to hear, just who you are, right? And without judgment, because that's not listening. Listening is just receiving the story, receiving who they are. Second thing, possibility. So I think listening has to do with intentionally putting yourself in spaces where you're not the majority. So maybe sometime this month or sometime this year, you attend a gathering where you're the demographic minority. So maybe a different age group or different cultural background or different economic reality. I don't have any particular places in mind, but maybe you know of one. Maybe that makes sense to you. And again, just go and listen, right? Not to try to think of counter arguments, to whatever the things that are being said, but just to learn, right? To learn. Who are they? What can I learn from them? Listening, I think, has to do with noticing who gets heard and who doesn't. Who has a voice and who doesn't. Maybe if you're at a work meeting, perhaps, right? You start to notice who gets listened to in that meeting, or whose ideas get credited to someone else, even though so-and-so just said that a minute ago. And maybe if you're the one who isn't being listened to, you kind of jump in. Maybe if you're the one who notices someone is not being heard, you say, I'd like to hear from so-and-so. Or if you're the one who's not being heard, and that could be the case, right? Sometimes we are the ones who are being othered. Maybe you say, I'd like to finish my thought, right? So here's the last one. Ready for this one? Maybe listening can mean examining our news and social media diet. Oh. Right? And maybe for a week, what about this? We watch the other news channel or watch the other YouTuber or whatever, that's what the kids do. Or you just find a different source. And not that you have to agree with them, right? But just to learn, where are they coming from? What are their fears? What are their anxieties? Why have they come to that conclusion? And I don't even like the word they, because that still has sort of this us and them sort of assumption. But what can I learn? What can I learn when I listen to these other sources of information? Now, listening does not mean, and let me just make this clear, listening does not mean agreeing with everything that someone else believes, right? It does not mean excusing harmful behavior. It does not mean abandoning your convictions. Right? It is treating someone as fully human and treasured by God. Right? Listening means caring enough to understand before you critique. And it means seeing their pain as real even when you disagree with their conclusions. God is a God who treasures the untreasured. We are called to be people who treasure the untreasured of the world. And if we feel like we are the untreasured ones, we have a God who treasures us more than we will ever know. When we celebrate what we celebrate at this table, we celebrate a God who treasures the untreasured. You know how much God treasures the untreasured? So much that God was willing to become an untreasured one, an othered one. Right? He came into the world as a peasant, right? In a conquered territory, part of one of the most powerful empires the world has ever seen. He was this one little guy, and he was executed as an untreasured one. Right? He died what was often called the slave's death or the criminal's death. It was the kind of death that was reserved for the worst of the world. God became an untreasured one. Why? So that we could live in the reality that we are treasured. Right? When Jesus rose from the dead, all that, as one way to think of it, all that untreasuredness that he experienced was turned upside down, and we get to join Jesus in that. Yes, sometimes we feel like we're the untreasured ones. We are the othered ones. And yes, sometimes we are the ones who treat others as though they are untreasured or othered. But we get to join Jesus in recognizing, in living in the reality that God treasures us more than we will ever know. Jesus became untreasured so that we could know that we are treasured. So I want you to know that you are welcome to come to this table, regardless of how treasured you feel. If you feel like an untreasured one, you are welcome to come to this table. If you feel like you're a treasured one, which we all are, you are welcome to come to this table. This is a table for Abraham and Sarah, for Isaac, for Hagar, for Ishmael, and for you and for me. Lord Jesus, thank you that we are your treasured ones. And all of us, at one time or another, certainly feel like we have been untreasured, like we have been othered. And we have been guilty of othering certain people, sometimes in a one-to-one relationship, sometimes a group of people. And so, Lord, we just pray that you would heal us. Heal us from the pain of having been othered or untreasured. Heal us from the sin of othering or untreasuring others, Lord. And again, just help us to live in the reality that we are your treasured ones, and no one can take that away from us. No one can take that away from us. We thank you. Amen.